All right, welcome to the City of Grant Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. First order of business is to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's see, first order of business that we have to take care of is the approval of the agenda. Make it a
I
motion.
make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Being none, we'll move on. See, we have a little bit of business to take care of before we get to the real reason we're here. We have to appoint a chairperson and a vice chair to serve temporarily until March, when we have an election of officers. So, would someone like to,
I nominate Bob Tufty.
Second.
okay, and I would like to nominate Matt,
And I'll-
or, no, I want to get you as vice chair, and then next time we'll do the other way. Okay, vice chair, I'd like to nominate Jeff.
I'll second.
Good seconds, okay, here we go. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? None, we can move on. Okay, we need to approve the minutes from the December 18th, 2018 meeting. Can someone make a motion for it?
I so move.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
he made the motion, he seconded.
Thank you.
All right. New business. This is where we,
Didn't vote on it.
We gotta vote.
didn't I? Thought so. Let's do it anyhow. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? How about we do that? Okay, the new business for tonight is a public hearing for the consideration of an amended conditional use permit for the construction of a deck and extended hours of operation for Delwood Barn Weddings at 7373 120th Street North. Get people coming yet. Okay, before we open public comments, we will ask our city staff to report on this subject, and then we will provide an opportunity for the applicants to speak on what they are planning to do with the barn and what they want to do. Perhaps some of the questions in our audience will have been answered in these comments. So, first off, I'd like to have Jennifer bring us up to date on your report.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Before us this evening, we have a request for an application to amend an existing conditional use permit. So I'll go through a little bit of the history in terms of how we got to here with respect to actually having a permit that we're looking at amending. That is similar actually to something we just looked at. We just looked at an amended permit as well last month, so it's not entirely new to the group. But this evening, the request is for the Delwood Barn Weddings, which underneath our code is identified as a rural event facility. So with that, if I could go ahead and have the presentation. So this request is made by the applicants and the owner of the facility. Scott Jordan is identified as the owner of the property. The company or the business that operates is the Delwood Barn Weddings. I believe that the representative here this evening is Julie, who's also associated with the business and actually was here when they originally applied for the application back in 2014. The property is located at 7373 120th Street North. The zoning and the guiding of the property is A1. The lot size is actually approximately 37 acres. That includes both parcels. So if you took a look at the application this evening, it actually identified the smaller, it only identified one of the two parcels. The existing conditional use permit actually is tied to both parcels, and therefore the amendment would tie to both parcels as well. The request this evening really has to do with one proposed construction activity, if you will, and the other relating to hours of operation. So when we break those two pieces out, obviously we would need to make sure that we're applying whatever amendments you may consider to both properties. As I just highlighted, there's essentially two portions or two requests that are associated with this, one being the deck, the construction of the deck on the south side of the facility. The second being the adjustment to the hours of operations, which I will get to in just one moment. There was a duly noticed public hearing published for this evening. The individuals that have property or interests within a quarter mile of the property were also sent individual letters. That includes property owners that are not in the city of Grant, also in the city of Delwood, and also the city of Hugo. The request this evening, based on the plans that were provided, were number one, to construct a 16-foot by 35-foot deck on the south side of the structure. That's approximately 500 square feet. I will note for you that there's actually two dimensions that were provided within the application materials tonight, so we'll need clarification with respect to what they're looking for. One of the dimensions was 16 by 35, which was on the plan set that were identified. The second being 16 by 40 feet, which was on the site plan. So we've got two different dimensions. Obviously, they equate to two different square footages, so we need to make sure that we understand which dimension we're actually looking at this evening. The second piece of the request this evening is to amend the hours of operation. I highlighted on the left-hand side the existing 2014 conditional use permit hours of operation that are permitted and associated with the permit, and then the proposed conditions are on the right-hand side. So currently in the 2014 permit, the facility is permitted to operate Monday through Thursday between the hours of 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. The proposed condition is that they be allowed to operate Monday through Thursday from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., so obviously an extension of hours on the weekdays. Friday and Saturdays, they are currently limited to 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. The proposed condition is from 1 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., so an extension of approximately 30 minutes. And Sunday, as the permit is currently drafted, there are no events that are permitted, and they are proposing that they be allowed up to 6 events per season, and that those hours be limited to 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. So when we take a look at the conditional use permits, obviously our first step is to take a look at what we have within our ordinances to understand how we review the conditional use permit. This is obviously a bit different because we're looking at an existing permit, and we are looking at what portions they are proposing to amend. So when we look at an amended permit, it is not opening the entire conditional use permit up for debate or discussion. It's bringing up those items that are being proposed for amendment because there are existing rights that are associated with the conditional use permit. So the process to go through the amendment is very similar to a traditional conditional use permit process, meaning it comes before you, we publish the public hearing so that we have the opportunity to hear from neighbors and potential neighbors who might be affected by the proposed amendments, and that they have the opportunity to come in and voice their concerns over what the amendments are. So in terms of then how we review those proposed amendments, then we trip into our regular criteria or ordinance section, which is under 32-141. That is where we take a look at conditional use permits in terms of consistency for use. So what those proposed amendments are, we look at it with respect to then how we would process an ordinary application as if there was no permit that existed today. The last section is section 32-352, which are the specific performance standards related to rural event facilities. That was an ordinance that was adopted and revised as part of a process in 2013 that preceded the application for the conditional use permit this evening for the Delwood Barn Weddings. I understand that a couple of you may not have had that within your books this evening. I did actually just pull it up on my computer, so if there are specific questions you have about ordinance language, I am happy to read it to you or highlight which parts you may have questions about. So I do have that here if you need some clarification about any of those items. In terms of the existing site conditions, the property is in our far northwestern corner. As a result of that, we actually do have those other two cities that are adjacent. So there is obviously the city of Dellwood and then also the city of Hugo. We don't often have that, obviously, in our community, but it does exist in that far northwestern corner. The existing facility is located on the 23 or approximately 24 acre parcel. The roadway is on the northern edge or northern side of the facility. There is an existing homestead that's on the property that the applicants are also residents of. There were various improvements that were required as a part of the 2014 permit process that have been completed and that staff, including the city engineer and the building inspector, have verified were completed in accordance with what the conditional use permit conditions were in 2014. The supporting adjacent parcel, as I noted, is actually part of the application, but it's part of the application because the existing conditional use permit is tied to both parcels. And obviously, if we amend it for one, it needs to be amended for both. Just for reference for folks that are taking a look at this in the audience and for the benefit of the commissioners, this is an aerial of the site to help orient folks. You can see here that the road sort of curves. It's sort of as if it's on a corner, but obviously not exactly a corner, but it's essentially has quite a bit of frontage that is bordering the northern and the westerly edge of the property. The two parcels that are associated with this is the one that is highlighted in red, and then also the property directly to the east, which is here. So those are the two parcels that are associated with the conditional use permit. The barn is here and is located slightly in front of, depending on how you look at the orientation of the site, in front of the principal structure. You can see from the aerial that here is where the gravel parking lot was constructed as part of the 2014 permit process. So you can get a sense of how the circulation works on the site and what was constructed after they were granted the permit in 2014. Obviously, when we take a look at conditional use permits, when folks are proposing to amend the permit, one of the things staff does is take a look at how consistent they've been with the conditions that exist on the permit today, and how their operations have complied or where they have had issues with the permit since their operations. Obviously, if we're going to amend it, we want to make sure that they're following the permit as it stands today. So staff did note in your staff report that in year one of operations, so in 2014, there were various issues. We had several complaints. There are a lot of pieces that also were not just from neighbors, but also internally from staff's perspective that we were trying to gain compliance with in terms of the site construction, the parking lot, the building permits, all those pieces. So in that first year of operations, there were some issues and there were complaints that came in. So to give you the full picture of how we got here. In 2015, early 2015, we did receive one additional letter that basically summarized and highlighted the issues that happened in 2014, which staff worked very closely with the applicant on trying to resolve and make sure that they were complying with the permit conditions, because obviously that was our number one concern. So after that time, after that early 2015 correspondence, we actually did not receive any complaints on the property at all until this July of 2018. So between that 2015 correspondence that happened very, very early, actually just before their season essentially got kicked off, and mid-2018, there were no complaints, formal complaints that were filed at the city per our records. So for all due, from a permit procedural perspective, they have complied with the permit conditions to the best of staff's knowledge, and we did not have any evidence of any any violations, if you will, of those permit conditions up until the time that we received the complaint in July of 2018. When that complaint came in 2018, the building inspector did go out to the site, did have communications and wrote a letter, I believe, to the applicants indicating that there was the complaint that we had received and to ensure that they were following the conditions of their permit. The complaint that was filed addressed two issues, essentially, one being that the northern doors were open during times when music was amplified, which is in violation of the permit, and then also that there was gathering happening on the north side of the facility. So those are both conditions that are contained within there that they are to respect. After that time, we did not receive any other formal complaints after the July 2018, and then our follow-up response. Staff would note tonight that in preparation for the public hearing tonight and in preparation for the discussion, I did go on their website and was looking at how they were publishing their hours of operation, et cetera, to make sure that their materials were compliant or consistent with our permit. Staff would note that based on that they are holding open, basically what they've advertised as open houses, that are scheduled in January, which based on the permit would be in violation of the strict interpretation of the permit. So it is something to note because it is out there. They essentially were advertising that they would have open houses at the facility on Saturday and Sunday for 3 weekends in January. So as you know, if you looked at the permit, we essentially have a seasonal business, and then we also don't permit events on Sundays. So there's an issue from that respect, and staff wanted to bring that to your attention. Dimensional standards of the site. So in the rural event facility zoning that was adopted, there are specific performance standards that are related to the rural event facilities. So that includes the fact that the property has to be located on 20 acres or greater, and they need 300 feet of frontage, and that frontage has to be on a state or county roadway, and that all access has to come from the state or county roadway. The facility is existing. Those are conditions that have already been met or deemed to have been met when the original permit was granted and issued. In terms of what we're looking at this evening, from a dimensional perspective, obviously the piece that we're looking at is where the deck is located to ensure that that complies with our standards, which I'll talk about in just one moment. So the site plan, this is actually the site plan that was reviewed in 2014 when the application originally was before the Planning Commission and the City Council. You will see it on that south side of the barn, a dimensioned, essentially, deck area off the south side of the barn, which is identified as 16 feet wide by 40 feet long. So as I stated, that's a little bit different than what's in the plans, so we obviously need to make sure that we understand what that is. When you look at the location of where the proposed deck is, it is to the rear and it's on the south side, and obviously as a result meets our conditions and is set further back from the roadway. The second piece that we looked at obviously is when you read the conditions that are contained within the conditional use permit, is that there is a prohibition on gathering or outdoor spaces on the north side of the facility, and obviously this is on the south side. So in many respects, actually, staff believes that this might improve any potential of folks wanting to congregate on the north side, that it might actually deter them from doing it. And also from a management perspective, that it would be easier actually to say, if you would like to congregate, you need to do it on the south side and get them out of the north side of the facility. One thing that staff would note is that while they are proposing to add, the 560 square feet or 620 square feet, whatever the final dimension is of deck to the space, it does not increase or alter the capacity that's permitted or the occupancy that is permitted on the site. So they are limited in their current permit to a certain number of folks and occupancy level, and that occupancy does not change as a result of the deck. So I want to make sure that that's clear to everybody who's here and also those who are listening, that the occupancy must stay the same, and that if you look at it from that perspective, then obviously if we're not adding occupancy, then we don't have to worry about adding additional parking spaces or any access or any of that. So we're not changing from an intensity perspective related specifically to the deck. There is no alteration from that perspective. One thing staff did note in your staff report is that there is no lighting that is noted on that south side or near the deck. And so clarification with respect to whether or not there would be additional lighting proposed in that area, staff would be looking for clarification. So the second piece of the request is to amend the hours of the operation. So I've tried very deliberately to separate them into separate discussion pieces that will hopefully help us through your discussion this evening and also for members of the public. We've separated it by exactly as they've proposed and requested. So weeknights, and weeknights being Monday through Thursday, weekends being the Friday and Saturday hours, and then the Sunday hours. So we've separated those three and made it very clear. So hopefully that will help with your discussion. Staff identified a few concerns within your Planning Commission report that I'll just highlight quickly, but won't go into a whole lot of detail with because I'm happy to answer questions once we're done. But obviously the Monday through Thursday operations, staff has some general concerns about. The staff has some concerns about the, sorry, just one moment. Thank you. Staff has some general concerns about when we went through the process initially in 2014, this room was filled with neighbors. And there was a lot of concern in particular about weeknights and the ability for them to enjoy their properties on nights when obviously kids have school the next day and when people have to go to work the next day. And there was a lot of concern about that, about the activity associated with a weeknight. So staff, I was here and I remember that, and there was a very large discussion that surrounded that. So I want to make sure that that is known to you, regardless of the fact that the room's not full tonight. But we have several folks here, but that was a very clear expectation. Was they were unhappy about the facility in general, but they were very concerned about what would happen during those weeknights. So I want to make sure that that's communicated. Sundays obviously are a little bit different, not always different than Monday through Thursday, but obviously during the summer and during the seasonal operations, there are weekends in which Sunday nights happen to be more of a weekend night. So when you think of Labor Day, Memorial Day, those dates, when folks aren't getting up to go to work the next day. So I can see how a limited number of Sundays might be beneficial or of interest to them. But again, the same concerns exist, particularly on Sunday nights when the next day is a work day or it's a school day. So those things I offer to you for discussion. In terms of the weekends, the additional half hour, obviously that's really up to you in terms of your discretion and your discussion. The condition that they must vacate and get out of the property and all lights out, staff's a little bit unclear as to what the issue is with that, so perhaps the applicant can talk a little bit about that. There's been some discussion about that extra half hour would really help for things like DJs, but we have a separate condition with respect to DJs, caterers, all of those being able to clear the site before and after, so perhaps the applicant can provide a little bit more clarification as to that association for that extra half hour. And then finally, as staff noted, unfortunately, I found the open houses today, and so I would bring that to your attention from the standpoint of if there is going to be off-season efforts where multiple people are going to come to the property, then it's really something we should be addressing within the conditions. Because if you read the strict interpretation of the conditions, those events would not be permitted. Because they are outside the season in which we've established, and they're also on Saturdays and Sundays, which currently are not, Sundays in particular, not permitted. So I bring that to your attention of something that we should probably address. So as I said, I'm trying to compartmentalize, for lack of a better way of saying it, a way for us to take a look at the discussion this evening. So a couple questions for you to think about as we go through this is, how did the proposed extension of hours of operations affect the activity level at the site? So do you view it as an intensification of the site? If it does, then what reasonable expectations and what reasonable conditions would be needed in order to address that? Some of that, obviously, if we get some public testimony tonight, we might be able to understand what some of the major concerns are and then identify what appropriate reasonable conditions might be to address it and mitigate it, or whether you determine you don't believe that they should be permitted to extend their hours of operation, for example. So essentially, staff has identified 4 things for you to make a determination and a recommendation about tonight. If you feel like you need additional time or information after tonight, we could carry this over to our next meeting. But in terms of what our conversation needs to include, I would say the number 1 would be the deck addition itself and whether or not there are reasonable conditions that need to be associated with that, or whether you feel that that is not warranted or what they've asked for doesn't comply with the intent of the permit. And therefore you would recommend denial of that. But if you were to recommend approval of it, are there any reasonable conditions that need to be associated with that? Number 2 would be the extension of hours from Monday through Thursday. Number 3 is the extension of hours on Friday and Saturday. And number 4 is the extension or the creation of hours of operation on Sunday. And then finally, how to address the open houses or off-season events. So with that, hopefully that lays it out pretty specifically, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Anybody have questions, Jennifer? I have one. Can you go back to the map or drawing of 2014?
Yep, here he does.
Thank you. Do you recall back when that first discussion was going on, a promise of blocking off that parking lot with trees basically around it?
No.
Okay. I see in the drawing, there's trees shown, planted in one side of it.
Correct.
I don't see what the discussion that I recall was, that was held then. Having a break of trees along at least 2 sides would be of huge help for some of the residents, both sound-wise and largely for headlights. When cars start moving out of a parking lot, they shine down to where there's residents. And then they turn to get out. The trees would help reduce that. And that hasn't been put in.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the site plan that was approved was what was
In the
required as.
discussions, there were conditions put on, and I was wondering if you had that.
That's what I'm saying. The conditions were that the north side of the parking lot, which is what you're seeing here, had to have the 2 rows of staggered trees, which are shown on here.
Okay,
And that there actually, I believe, were also trees that were required on the north side of the barn.
there are trees there for sure. I don't know about those,
So the applicant submitted this site plan here, but if you go back to the site plan that was approved, the modified, most up-to-date one, there was a row of trees or a row of hedges or whatever it was, arborvitae, whatever it was, that was on the north side of the barn. But there was nothing, it was not to surround anything. It was basically a buffer on the north side of the facility.
yeah, those are there, because we drove by the other day and saw that. But I am very concerned about the parking lot trees, so we may have to go have another look and see if that's been done or not.
Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is they have complied with the conditions that were written in the 2014 permit with respect to the planting.
So they haven't done the one on the parking lot? But that
On the
wasn't
north
listed?
side of the parking lot,
Yeah.
those have not been completed? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Okay.
We'll have to go by it, because I cannot recall for sure, but
I believe the city engineer and the building inspector are responsible for verifying that no, you can see them on the aerial here.
They are on the north side,
They are
I'm
there.
sure.
They're on the north side.
I think they're rather small trees.
Yeah, they would be if it can't, because
That
I
may be
can't
the-
see them, but, okay, then that's good. But I think that as a condition of doing some other things, we ought to include at least the west end of that parking lot.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, obviously that's something that you could certainly discuss. But I would caution you that the conditions that you place need to bear a relationship to what the application is being proposed. Okay, so we are looking at if that in some way buffers or helps with the sound mitigation that you're concerned about on the deck, for example, that may be a reasonable condition. But if that does not achieve the objective of whatever is related to the application this evening, you just have to be mindful of what reasonable conditions you place on it. Okay, there needs to be a relationship between, because again, we're not opening up the whole permit. We're opening up the specific items they're requesting, the hours of operation and the deck. So then the reasonable conditions that are applied to it have to be related to those two items. So that's,
They absolutely will be.
just want to make
Thank
sure
you.
that. Yep.
Jennifer, I don't have a question, but just a quick comment. I would encourage the applicant or the applicant's representative to comment on how the existing space on the south side of the barn is currently being used during events, and how that would potentially change with the addition of a deck. And then we can allow for public comment on your statement as well.
Okay, Jennifer, anybody have any more questions for Jennifer?
When you say that it won't change the occupancy as such, that the site occupancy will remain the same, what means of enforcement, if any, are there to it? You now have a deck. Are you gonna say that, okay, you can't have tables out on the deck so that you remove the temptation to serve a few meals out there in addition to what you're doing in the barn? Or I don't think anybody's gonna be there counting people, right?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just like all of our permits, they are on a complaint basis, number one. But number two, a conditional use permit is a contract between the applicant and the city. So if the applicant agrees to the conditions in the permit and say they're going to hold their occupancy level to that, then that's what they're required to do. So some of it is, they have to be responsible for their permit compliance. But if someone were to come, there's also fire inspector rule, commercial building standards, et cetera. So all those pieces, their insurance, all of those things come into play. But are we going to go out and count heads? Probably not. But that's why some of this is, individual responsibility of they are signing a contract when they sign the permit that says that is our occupancy. I will say when I was on their website today, that they actually list their occupancy, maximum occupancy, as less than what is even permitted in the permit. So, staff was doing their due diligence to try to make sure that what is being advertised and promoted is consistent with what's in the permit. And from an occupancy perspective, I believe their number on it was 240, and I think the permit says 253. So, just so you're aware of how they're marketing it, and that it is at this time, at least from that perspective, consistent with what's in the permit. So,
Yeah, I did see the frequently asked questions, and those complied with the permit.
Jim?
Has at any time the decibel level been taken as to when it gets too loud?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I have not gone out there with a decibel meter. To my knowledge, I'm not sure that the building official has either. I do know as part of the permit, if my memory is right, they were required to purchase a specific, is that right? I can't believe I actually remember this. But yes, they were required to purchase a specific decibel meter that then I think they show to the sheriff if they show up. If the,
They're all night, so he sees us going up to the hill, digging all that.
yeah, if you want them to come up and talk about it, I just want to make sure we get it into the record. So, but there was a decibel meter. So have decibel readings been taken? Yes. Staff is not responsible for that though, and that was very specifically addressed within the 2014 process.
Any other questions for Jennifer? Hearing none. Next, we'll have, I'd ask the applicants if they'd like to give a presentation. Go right ahead.
Hello, I'd like to address the Planning Commission and say thank you for listening to our requests. And I am Julie Jordan. I'm actually married to Scott Jordan, the owner, and he is out of town, so he was unable to get here tonight. I do work with Scott, trying to make it a great venue, event day for our people that come, and then we also strive super hard to follow the rules because we want our neighbors to be happy also, and the council to be happy that we keep our permit. So I am also happy to talk later on your list about the open house that we violated, which we didn't think we were. So let me know what questions you have, and we could just go down our requests, and I can give you more detail on what we were thinking why we asked for it, for the business.
What is the typical use of the outdoor space on the south side of the property during events, if any?
The south side, so that would be.
That's where the deck
That
would
would
be
be the
going.
deck would be. Right now, we have our cocktail hour, so there's, people are in our front lawn area, which is where the.
Front is what side?
It's paralleled right on the south side. It's where that white building is, so it's the tree in between the house, yes.
Yep.
So that they cocktail there, right now they congregate, and so we're proposing, we always like to come up with new ideas and with the sound, so by putting the deck on the back of the barn, we felt that the guests could not only be outside there, but then they could be up on the deck, which would bury the sound from maybe going on the north side where the Hugo residents are, and then also we're hoping with airflow, with the doors open on the cooler months, that would get, air from the south side coming into the barn for airflow. We are, I heard the word lights, not proposing to have people out after dark. That's what's our goal, is to keep everybody in the barn. The mosquitoes come out first most. So, and then we like them to come in and dance and then have all their fun, and then the doors are closed. So the only people that are really out after dark is they're going from the barn actually to the fire pit. So there's usually 5-10 people around there, to about 10-15, and they're conversing and doing s'mores, and then they go back in the barn. So the deck is going to be more for during the day, after the ceremony, for people, if they're not at cocktail hour or in the barn, that they have two choices. The noise, we're hoping, is going to be back there, and that the neighbors are far enough, the 35 acres way back, that we're hoping that, the sound should not change anything. And then also County 7 is very dangerous, and it does state that our guests are not to congregate on the front of the barn. So we do diligently work all day and night to make sure there's no guests out there. The biggest time that you'll see the congregation, or when they had called to complain, is when the wedding party breaks around 6:30. They're done with dinner and they do their speeches. So everybody takes a break in between before they have their first dance, which is usually a half hour later. So about 100 people get up because they want to stretch, and they go outside because they're going to go to the fire pit to have a cigarette or kind of take a little stretch and walk around before they come back in to see the bride do her first dance. So that's when we get that massive amount of people, and they don't know what to do. So with the deck, they actually would be able to go that way too. Besides, we are always pushing them away from the front, because we actually had a accident about 3 years ago on County 7 on a Thursday at 4 o'clock. We had two neighbors going home, and one was going up towards Grant, and then the other one was leaving the neighborhood, leaving to go to White Bear, and the gentleman that was leaving was on her side of the lane, and she countered over to get up back into his lane, and he countered over to get back to her lane, and they hit head on. And luckily, two of my bartenders were there putting together a new bar cooler for me, and I was in the house, and they both worked for Washington County, and they're EMTs. And one of the cars flipped and went in the ditch. So that's even more of a reason for us to make sure no one's on the front lawn. So everybody was okay, but it was a scary hour.
Okay.
So that's the reason for the deck, but either way, no one's allowed on the front lawn, but that's even more reason that as a mother, when the little kids run out there, I'm like, your kids need to go to the back of the barn because of what we know.
Where is the fire pit?
The fire pit is on the south side, and it's straight down, yeah, Jennifer, right by that white building, straight up, and then to your left, a little bit more, left, on the other side, right there. So it's right in that little area right there.
I don't know. I don't have the,
We're in relation to the barn, we're to the west or south?
Right there. Go straight up with the arrow, right there. So it's right behind that white building.
I can't see that
Yeah,
far.
right down, a little bit, yep, right there.
If you see the white
The
barn.
little arrow, yeah.
If you look at the white building that's next to the parking lot, it's directly south of there.
Just south of that,
so,
yeah. South of that building there, right in here.
right here someplace, it's not, okay, it's not identified on the drawing, you're saying?
Right. So that's where our
Okay.
smoke-free area is if we have someone that's smoking to keep them away from the barn from a fire safety, because there is still a few smokers out there. So that's why they go down to that area.
And then where's the entrance to the barn for people to enter and exit? Is it on the the west side?
North side.
North.
Oh, on the north.
Yeah, so we face, yeah, it's on the north side, so it faces County 7.
So that's probably why people congregate there, because that's where the entrance.
They come out, yeah, they come out the front of the barn, and then they're all, see this big, beautiful front lawn. So that's where, and it's, yeah, so we usually try and go out there very politely and tell them that, you know, it's not for safety, from a safety issue. We tell them with the little kids that we want you to, you know, and then from a noise, the respect of our neighbors is what we tell them. And then we tell them to come to the side of the house where cocktail hour is. We have chairs sitting there, so that's where we congregate
But
everybody.
that's the entrance into which they go into the building to begin with, right?
Yes, that's the
main
only
So
entrance.
it's natural in exiting that they're gonna go out the same way, and if they're gonna stand around and talk, that's probably gonna be the same place.
So they come out, and they all want to stand on the sidewalk, so our nice deputy, usually, that's his job, because everyone smiles when he asks them to leave the area and go to the other side of the farm. So it's a constant battle, but we work diligently to try and really get everyone to move at all times.
Would it make any sense to change the main entrance to go in from the deck? Have a wide stairway at the
Change the
west
main
end of the deck?
entrance? No.
It would not make any sense?
No, we did talk about that way back in the day, so. They're beautiful doors, and we've got a beautiful sidewalk, if you drove by, that goes
I've
up.
seen it. It's very
Yeah, and the
nice.
flowers and everything, so, it works out okay. You know, I mean, moving people, it's a little bit of work, but it works.
I think it would be helpful for us if you could kind of describe your business. I know you call yourself a wedding barn. Are all events weddings?
They have been so far.
Okay. And then it seems like the amplified music is an issue. Are all events have amplified music?
Inside the barn for DJs?
Right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
pretty much every one of at this point, you're allowed 3 events a week.
Correct.
So typically, each one has music.
Yes, we haven't had any corporate events, because usually the brides like the Friday, Saturdays,
You
so.
don't have small weddings with like a little 3-piece band or anything?
We have
like
had that, yes, but that would be I was thinking that would be amplified too, a
Okay.
band, but maybe not, maybe we've had a
I
couple.
guess I would call it
I've had a
little
bluegrass band, so I guess that wouldn't have been amplified.
So, I've been to probably the nicest wedding I've ever been to. It had a nice little 3-piece band.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't loud, it was more of listening music. And I just curious if
Right.
you do stuff like
They're,
that.
you can control them a little bit, so they're just as, I mean, the brides want to be able to dance, so they wouldn't want to hear something super soft, so it's a nice
So I
volume.
think it would help if we knew, about your events.
Okay, sure.
You're allowed 253, maybe not all your events have that large amount of people.
No,
I know you're really expanding your available hours.
I'm trying to diversify it is a better word. We go into a little more detail,
Right.
so I'm trying to diversify, so we can do, not necessarily more events, but by adding a few Sundays, it will help me diversify, because I'd like to take more of a full week off. So our proposal is if we had 6 Sundays, up to 6 Sundays, then that would allow us to recapture, that income on those Sundays, and then we'd be closed 4th of July week. Weekend. I wouldn't need to do the whole weekend. I personally don't want to work every weekend. So it's it's a lot of work, and then I'd like to take some time off, not having people on the farm all the time. So that was my thought that I wanted to propose, that if that was allowed, then we would, could trade off and say that we would, for every 2 Sundays, 1 whole weekend we're not open. So that would give the neighbors a break. You're not open 4th of July weekend, or there's 5 weeks in August, so I'd love to maybe not be open the last weekend in August, because everybody goes to the state fair, so employees don't want to work. So it's another great break in the summer for us. So that was our thought process for the Sundays to possibly talk to you guys about for us. And then right now with the weekday times, we are not really able to book anything because of the time that's allowed currently is 11 to 2. So from a business standpoint, you can't really rent it to like a 3M, because they've called a few times and they would love to do a team building. So it would be an early afternoon, and they're bringing in their employees, doing their team building experience, having lunch, and then maybe they're doing a couple hours of dancing. So that's more like, an afternoon event until 8 at night is what we're thinking. So it would be nice to possibly be able to do that. And then I'd be able to get 3 events in a week, which would be a couple times a summer, which would then allow us to then not have another, that 1 week, because I've captured the money in an event, in that 1 solid week that we've done more than less. So that was the reason for proposing. We're not looking to do 80 events. If the city, I sent to the city, or this Washington County Sheriff had actually listed out how many events we've done over the last 5 years, and we're staying in the 37 to the 40s. When, if you count all the weekends that we have, we've never sold out completely. So, this year we're on track to be in the 40, if not less, fewer, give a couple more. So we're not trying to sell every event.
Now, the wedding parties, I assume they're the ones that choose who's going to be their music.
They do, and yes.
Bands, some are trained and some aren't, I guess, based on the experience of my kids who are into music. They get to do things at people's weddings and don't necessarily have much of an idea of what decibel levels are or anything when they do it.
We have a conversation with their, whoever that they, in our contract that we give our brides, it says that we actually have a great list of preferred DJs that come week after week, 6 of them. And they have we have them have insurance, because we want to make sure that none of the equipment falls on anyone, so we're very safety conscious. And then our DJs that come week after week are very aware of the decibels and what works great for the barn, and they just know how to work it. So we really try and lean the brides to use our DJs, which works out great for that purpose. And then for the ones that would like to choose their own, we actually have them send our contract, which talks about the decibel level and the hours that we close. And then they actually provide us with insurance also before they're allowed to come on the farm. So we make sure our safety for our guests and for the barn, everything is covered. So, and then they know that we have a decibel reading that we go out and throughout the night, even when the barn doors are closed, because we're bound by the noise pollution like any other business. And unfortunately, we're very close to the road, about 200 feet. So we make sure that we check it at least once an hour to make sure the DJ's not turning it up, one of the DJs that we don't know. And if they do, we go in and we make sure it's turned down. So we're very conscious of that. We try and be respectful of everybody. If they played it too loud, Grandma's hollering anyways because she can't hear. So it's a nice volume, but people are not screaming to their neighbor next door like a rock concert.
On the deck that you're building,
Proposing, yes.
you're proposing, whatever, what kind of style and what kind of safety things, given that people are quite often under the weather and would fall right off of it, is it made correctly and
We would do the same thing that we did with when we went through the process to build this, to bring our barn up to date and up to all the different, permitting and laws and safety. We do the same thing with this one. And then to just give you one, for instance, which you're all welcome anytime to come see the barn, inside of it, we have a loft. And then the loft, we actually have a ledge that we built, and we built it actually higher than code. I don't know if it's 10 inches higher, but it's about this high, and code is lower, because we wanted to make sure that no little kid went up there and tried to climb over it, and the actual lip that's on it, we did from a safety measure, so we're, it only takes one, so we tried to do everything, up and beyond, and then my husband's been in construction, so I think it helps a little bit when they're talking that foreign language, the inspectors and all the building permits that need to be done.
So, you said you do about 40 events per year?
It's
plus or
average
minus?
between, like, the first year was 18, and then I think he wrote on, the officer, first year was 18, the next year was 46, 44, 49, and 42 last year.
Okay.
We're on track to write the
What's
same
your
thing.
projected with, if you were to, these change in hours, what's your projection?
Same
Or
thing.
Same
Right in the
number?
mid-40s, yes.
Okay, you're not really thinking to increase the number of events, you just want more flexibility as to what
Correct.
days of the week you could have
Correct.
your events.
I'd say 50 would be the max.
Okay.
In a perfect world,
Okay.
they're long hours and you give up your summer. I mean, you have trade-offs in every business you're in, but, yeah.
Would you be open if the neighbors would like to have, say, one day a week that you would not be able to have an event? Would that be an option?
Of course. Of course. I just, like I said, we've had a few calls for events during the week for 3M, and it's something that being in the business, you don't want to necessarily not be open to it. So we're definitely, we stay busy even, we don't need to have venues every day.
Another question, would you be open to the amplified music? Seems like it's the issue. If you could have at this point, you're allowed 3 events a week and they can have amplified music. Now you're proposing 4 events a week. Would you be open to, like, during the weekdays, to not have amplified music? Or if you have music, it's not like a DJ with blasting music, but more of you could have music, but not.
There's pros and cons to that, if I may interject, just for my weddings that I've done now. Even if it wasn't amplified, it's like those bands, it still can get loud in there, so you still are taking some control of it. Another thing that we've done to take control of the business in the music aspect, we do not allow the brides to bring iPods, for anybody to bring speakers in inside the barn for the music. The music has to be controlled by a professional at all times. No guest is allowed behind the thing, so that we do. So we're really particular to make sure that the music is in full control by a professional, because they understand when I walk up and I just give them the eye to bring it down, and then I tell them my decibel's at a certain level, so they understand that. So you're not dealing with, somebody that's been drinking back there, so I'm not sure having, like I said, there's still music, I still have to worry about the doors open, you still have the sound from the actual guests in there, so.
I think the issue is that during the week, so.
During the week,
How likely
it's-
is it to have a wedding Monday through Thursday?
It's more of our vision as a corporate event, not a wedding. It would be for 3M that calls and wants to do the team building, we get requests for that. So, and I haven't pursued it any further because no one can come from 10 to 2. So that would be, on our checklist of, to get one or 2 in there, a few this summer.
Would you be open to restriction to corporate events
What kind of
During the week.
restrictions?
during the week?
Oh, sure, no problem. Yes, I don't need another wedding. Yeah, we don't need weddings. It's more for that, it's for 3M, and we've had a bunch of local businesses in the area call that wanted to do something.
And the hours that would be good for you are what?
I was proposing, or we're proposing,
Till 10 PM.
9:30 site, dark, vacated. So what I was reflecting when I wrote that, I was going back to our permit, because usually our permit, what they have is that the last hour of business on here, it's dark, because that would be for like a DJ to pack up. It takes a DJ about 50 minutes to take all their equipment, and they back their truck up to the farm, and they're getting their stuff out, so that'd be the last hour. So yeah, so actual business, our guess I'm proposing would be off at 8:30. So you're then from 8:30 to 9:30 is when, it's usually just the DJ, and then it would be, and that's the same thing with weddings, when it's the last hour of business. It's the parents that are taking their box of pictures of their family out, and they're loading their stuff up. All the main noise has been long gone.
Jennifer, can you confirm in your staff report, they applied for weekday hours till 10 PM, not 8 or 8:30? Can you confirm which is correct?
10 PM is
10
what was
PM is what the
requested.
applicant requested.
And I would like to also make a clarification about how the permit is drafted, actually. So the permit specifically says that the hours of operation, which are defined as the actual event time, shall be limited to the following, and that's the hours of operation. Subsection 4D addresses staff, caterers, deliveries, musician setups, and other support activities. So those are separate from the event times. So I just want to make that clarification, because
So on page 2 of the staff report, those are the event times.
that is what was submitted.
Okay, so I made a mistake on my part. That's an error on our part. I'm very sorry for that. So that's what we envision. So if we had an event, it'd fall under how our permit would be done. So the actual guests would be off at 8:30, and then from 8:30 to 9:30 would be, if anyone's, the people that are putting on the event, if the DJ was leaving, or if the corporate people are cleaning up their stuff from their event. That's what they're doing that last hour to get off the farm. So it's usually pretty quiet. We don't ever get complaints after that, because they're inside the barn, and the doors are closed, so people are just actually walking from outside to their car, which is right next to the barn. They're not, going far with their things.
Jennifer, one quick question. Does the 2014 CUP cap the maximum number of events per year, or is it just 3 per week
3 per
during
week.
the operating season?
Correct. 3 per week during the operating season.
Yeah, I think it's about time. Can we ask you to stick around so you can answer more questions?
Yes. The only other thing that I didn't say that I was wondering if I could clarify on our other that we proposed, on the extension on Friday to Saturday, on our Friday-Saturday events, what we were proposing was currently on our CUP, the guests are off at 11, and we'd like to extend it only a half hour till 11:30.
And what was the purpose for
The
that?
purpose is on our Friday weddings, because people are still at work. And generally speaking, if you look at a lot of the other wedding venues that are in the area and around town, Cottage Grove, Scandia, they close at midnight, 12:30. So for us, from a business standpoint, it's super hard to sell it, because the bride is like, you want me to be out gone at 11? So that would help us tremendously, just a half hour to say, oh, you can, it would be music till 11. Normally now we do music till 10:30, and the guests are off at 11. So we'd be proposing that they get a few more minutes of music, and then they, 'cause it takes about a half hour to get everybody off the farm. By the time they start, they say their goodbyes, and then the police officer starts pushing them out the door, and then they get on the bus and get in their cars. So we always make sure there's enough time to get it quiet here for the neighbors.
What sort of
Thank you.
control do you have in the parking lot, though? I mean, I can
I'm
see
sorry?
where people have to leave, like most business places or weddings, and they consider themselves gone when they leave the building. Well, when they go to the parking lot and they stand there and they're talking to
Nobody
each
stands, I
other.
promise you. Yeah, our police officer's outside, he's actually on site. So we do our due diligence to get everybody well on their way. At 10:40, if there's anybody on the dance floor, he's walking around saying, you need to get going, to get them out there. So they're in their cars, and then otherwise they're getting on. We have a lot of shuttles that the brides do, because they'll go back to the local hotel. So yes, everybody, there's not a soul that's a guest making noise. And if we do get a complaint, it's usually because if you walk outside, you can hear all the parties in the summer around us. So we're like, shoo, that's not us. So you can, yeah, many times we can hear the neighbors having their fun.
Okay, how about the deck?
Okay?
That's gonna be like an amplification in itself with that, next to the wall of the barn, a deck going across that pond area or the swamp area to, again, houses. Is there any plan at all of getting a sound engineer to come up with ways of muting sound on that side of the barn? I realize that by having people there, you're helping the people on the hill. 'Cause
Correct.
they're not outside on the north side, but when you put them on the south side,
Right.
you have neighbors, they're further away, but they're pretty close, actually, for sound travel.
Correct. We did huge sound studies. I would have not thought that sound would have traveled that far. We actually hired someone that did the Excel Energy Center for the sound study that the city required as part of our permit. And they went into those neighborhoods and they played music, and their decibel readings were like zero, were very low. All that stuff is listed in there. So I was, just initially talking to you, wouldn't think that would carry to those neighbors. That's 30 acres way back there. Because they're in our yard no matter what, and they can't hear it now. So, but if that is a concern, it's definitely something that we should look at doing,
Well, it'd be actually to us even more of a concern because
Yeah.
you have Grant residents and nice homes and all this. And
Correct.
if they have complaints about they can't sleep with a window open or whatever because of the sound coming from there, that's a justifiable complaint.
Right, well, the doors are closed and everyone's in when it's dark. So you're saying if someone might be going to bed earlier, like at 7 in the summer, is that what you're proposing? That might be
Anytime,
nosy?
8, 9, whatever.
Sure.
I'm a late
I mean, the
night
doors,
owl, so-
yeah, another proposed, you could consider, if that would be it, those doors could be locked at after a certain time, nobody's out on the deck. I mean, from a safety reason, I would want to lock it anyways. We don't need people going in and out after a certain time. You don't want people, because it's more of a negative when we're telling people when it's dark out. We wouldn't want them going back out on the deck anyways. Because, those doors would need to be locked from that reason. You don't want people hanging on it, so.
There'd be some lighting concerns for the deck too that I think we should talk about.
They're not proposing lighting and they're not proposing use after
I was
dark,
thinking the
so-
doors were gonna be locked, 'cause it's dark out and people shouldn't be out there, like you said, because we don't want people out there screaming, because everyone, when it does get dark out, if they're not at the fire pit, they're in dancing, having fun. So that's generally speaking with the events. Once it starts getting dusk, the mosquitoes come out, and then 150 people are all in there dancing and standing at the bar
So
and
then they
chatting.
start going back out the north door again to smoke or whatever.
If they go out the door, the officer shoos them down to the fire pit area. That's the only place they can smoke, because the barn was built in 1855. So we do not want any smokers by our barn. So that's one of the main duties the officer is to make sure the safety of everyone throughout the night, and that people are staying inside. That's his two concerns that he
It
does
is.
for us. Yes, and Washington County Sheriffs do a great job. Very pleased.
Well, yeah, but it's just a concern about that sound travel because, if we don't face that now,
Correct.
when the people are getting, kept awake,
Correct.
how do we handle it then? So this is the time to really consider it.
Right.
And come up with some kind of a understanding or an agreement or whatever.
Right.
That if we have people being disturbed, that we then have to, open up a talk about sound suppression.
Right, you're talking about like during the day, if it was bad, you mean,
Anytime,
once it's built? I mean, right now, we do abide by all the noise ordinances, keeping people inside the barn at night and with the music, because we are bound, like any business or any, I mean, so we really try and make sure that we're within so we don't have a complaint and someone stopping by the wedding.
Okay. Well, in a few minutes here, we want to open up public comments, and then
Yes.
maybe after that, we'll have more questions.
Sure, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I make a motion that we open the public hearing.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. So we will,
Got to vote?
at 7:35.
All in favor?
Ready?
Have to vote on it.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favor of opening the public comments, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ready to go. So at 7:35, public comment opens. Now, before we start public comments, I'd like to give a little spiel here. Everybody that comes up to make public comment, there's a sheet of paper on that little side table next to the stand here. Please print your name and your address. In past hearings that we've held, you get the name only, no address. You can't read the name. Please print and do it legibly, because our clerk has to have a written record of everything that's happened here. If she can't read names, she can't record them. So please be diligent there. And so anybody that would like to get up and talk, please raise your hand. We'll call on you, and please come forward. And also state your name.
Thank you, commission members, for giving me an opportunity to talk. I'm Melinda Lopes. I live at 12160 Upper Heather Avenue North, Hugo. And you can see my house is right across the street from the wedding barn. I think we're probably about 400 feet. And I just want to play for you. This is what this sounds like from my house. I can hear this. This is the MC talking, nothing, no music going on yet, but the dollar dance starts, and we have, I'll show you, now we've got, so that's the music at 8 o'clock at night at my house. So when we want to have anything on our property, all of our guests have to listen to this, and I have to listen to this every single time I go outside. And so when it's not music playing and it's just people gathered outside, this is what it sounds like at my house. So it's great to talk about the diligence that you provide and the people that are coming and stopping the noise, and the fact that it's only at a certain point of the evening that it's an issue. But for us, it's an issue every Friday or Saturday night. And the only respite we have on a weekend, when we also have time off, is on Sundays at this point. And so now, with the addition of Sundays, it will be every holiday weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So the concept of having a week off would be great, except it's not in the language that was proposed. So everything that's being promised here is not reflected in the application that was put in, and there are events, as she said, 48 times during this period of time. We don't know when the blank weekends are going to be, so we have no opportunity whatsoever to use our property without listening to this noise. And you may think that it's quiet when people are leaving at night, but we're on that ridge, and so the upper floor of our house is not buffered. There's no way to buffer us up on the hill at our bedrooms facing the back of that house. We're hearing drunk people laugh and talk and say goodbye to the bride and groom. And so this property was zoned for residential use and for agricultural use. You got an exception for that. You run a property, at first it was going to be, just a few little weddings were going to happen. This is all that we had planned. Even Mayor Carr said that in the council meeting. What you've done and proposed is a lot different from what you talked about when you came to the council and said it would be just a few events. So now it's every single weekend. The city council heard all of the neighbors talk. They considered all of these things, and they came up with something that they thought was fair for the neighborhood. We had Sundays, you had Fridays and Saturday nights. We have people who are going to school. I mean, half of this season is while children are in school and people are going to work, and the only respite that's being offered to us is during the week when people are already having to go to work. So we want to enjoy our property too. And right now, we can't enjoy our property on weekends because it's constant noise. And even when the music is not being amplified, you just hear this buzz of noise. There are cocktail tables set up to the western edge of the barn. There are people congregating, little white tablecloths are out there all over these cocktail tables, and we are just constantly inundated with noise. So there isn't a way to buffer our house. We have trees, they close the doors. We even hear the music in the barn when the doors are closed. And by the way, they're not supposed to have any live bands there on that property at all. The only thing was supposed to be amplified DJ music, so I don't even know how we got to bands. And there have been times when we talked to each other, the neighbors, and I came out one day and my entire railing on my house was vibrating from the noise, and I went down the hill and looked at the barn, and the doors were all closed. And yet this is still vibrating at 10:30 at night. So this is a huge ordeal for us. And what we're asking is, nothing has changed since the last time this issue was considered with respect to days and hours of operation. And yet here we're asking for more, we're asking for something different when this discussion was already had and nothing has changed in the interim. The city council already made a decision about what was reasonable hours, given the fact that this is a residential neighborhood. And with respect to the complaints, I have to say that when you get told that there's a city has a complaint for a process, you're not supposed to call the police, you're not supposed to contact the city council members, you get something telling you that this is how you have to submit a complaint, and that upon determination, the complainant will be notified of the action taken. So right now, you send a letter in, and you never hear anything ever again. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing has happened. You continue to get the music every weekend. You get tired of complaining when nobody ever gets back to you about anything or gives you an opportunity to comment about what it's like to actually live in this property. And it's pretty terrible already. And so the fact that our neighbors are coming and asking to be even more disruptive than they are now is just absolutely unbelievable for a neighborhood that is in Hugo and in Grant is supposed to be a residential neighborhood. We are 400 feet from this event center. It's not like this barn is in the middle of 30 acres. This barn is probably 400 feet from my house. And from my property line, I mean, their property ends at the road and mine starts right across the road, as do many of these people here. And so I'm asking for it to stay the way it is. If I can't make it go away, I just like it to stay where it is because I can't imagine it getting any worse.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else like to speak?
I'll go ahead and talk questions.
Sure, say your name and
Good
speak.
evening, Kevin DeVore. I'm here with my wife Christy, and we live at 11535 Hillcrest Court North in Grant, which would be probably on the bottom of the picture that's up there. So the deck would be facing us, so we'd be on the south side of that property, connecting to their property. So the concerns that we have are both with the sound and the lighting. So the deck, the way things are now, it depends on the wind, it depends on the day, the temperature, all that stuff can affect the way that sounds travel. Right now, the outside congregation stuff that Ms. Jordan was talking about is down on a lower level, right? So there is some sort of sound abatement as it concerns our property to the south. If they build a deck, they're going to be elevated. I don't know how high the deck is that they're planning on building, but anytime you build a deck, you're going to be off the ground. I don't know if it's a foot off the ground or 10 feet off the ground, but you're going to elevate that sound level. So, and the other thing that's going to happen is I get the intentions are there not to have too much activity on the deck, but we all know that people want to be outside, right? That's a beautiful area. You know, they look towards our house and they look towards our land and the things that we look at out the back of our yard, well, there's a reason that they want to go out to the south side, because that's the most beautiful view out there. That's what we like about it as well. If you put a deck there, that's where they're going to want to go, right? Right now, they're down on the gravel driveway in that area, and yeah, it makes do just for a little while, but most people want to get inside the barn. You put a deck out there where you have good views, well, now you're going to amplify the noise. I think it'll affect the properties to the north as well, because even if it's on the back side of the barn, it's still going to be going over to the top. I mean, you're not going to be able to contain that. You put a bunch of people on a deck of that size, it's going to make noise. The other thing I'm concerned about is the lighting. And I remember that I was here too, what was it, 2014?
Yep.
And I remember comments as well about buffering. I don't know if it ended up making it in the actual CUP or not, about buffering to the south, but I do remember comments about that to buffer the lighting from the parking lot. Now, one thing I just want to talk to the commission about is this can be a slippery slope. So you allow a deck, you allow expanded hours. When we first dealt with this several years ago, we were talking about minimal amount of days, minimal amount of hours, minimal amount of events. And I remember specifically the Jordans talking about just a small event center. Well, now I hear her saying that, she wants to expand the hours because it's so hard to land those corporate clients during the week. Well, she's already having 50 events a year. I don't know how many more events that she wants to have, right? Which means that we all have to have the events with her. And it's a slippery slope, because if you open that door, you get a new owner there, or maybe they decide to relinquish their operations part of the business and they let somebody else manage that part because they don't want to deal with all that. Well, they're going to maximize the number of times they're going to want to use that event center. And if you open that door and allow them to have more events, they're going to have as many events as they can possibly have. I mean, anybody that runs a business wants to maximize their dollar. And so I caution you when you make that decision about expanding the number of hours and the number of days. So we put our trust in your hands to listen to our views and complaints, as well as protecting their interest as far as running a business. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sign in. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment? Please come up.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commission. Thank you for the time today. My name is Tom Windish. I'm located at 12150 Upper Heather Avenue. So on this picture, I'm right next to the roads and the lopes, and very close. I'm straight up from the barn. Okay, not diagonally, I'm straight up from the barn. I wrote up a little something what I wanted to talk about. A lot of things have been mentioned, so I probably won't hash on all of this. But I guess, it was pretty contested. Jennifer, you laid it out real well. I think she teed it up well. The points brought up by Melinda and Kevin are also very important, and I think hit the mark. It was contested. There were a lot of people. There's still a lot of people that are concerned and aware. I think the group is smaller because the affected group, is probably here, the ones that are directly in, eye shot of the barn and the business. But I can tell you that there's many people that are concerned. You probably have received a lot of letters from them. So anyhow, I'll move on. But the point that Melinda brought up earlier, 2014, when 2015 hit, it was the first year, there were some growing pains and there were issues, right? And I think that they did make, some ample improvements towards that. But I can tell you that it's not like it never happens. Like Melinda had on her video and her audio, I can do the same thing. I have a pool area that sits absolutely at the top of the hill, and I can hear the conversations. When people are going out to have their little smokes, I can hear them. They're talking about what they did for the week and what they did that day. And, you know, we deal with it. It's Friday and Saturday. You know, that's kind of the deal, right? But, you know, we would have some concerns with extended days, right? Sunday is a day that we know we can enjoy at the home unobstructed from anything else. We can do what we want to do. We're not disrupting our neighbors, nor are we being disrupted. So that's certainly a concern. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, the conditions are occasionally broken. We don't call the sheriff's department anymore. We used to. We did the first 2 years. My wife would go down there. At the end of the day, the sheriff kind of said, well, you know what, you guys are calling a lot. You just need to contact the city. So we did that, but we really didn't see a whole ton of action. So we gave up. It's the reality of it, right? If you wanted a letter every week, we would do it if we knew it was going to take action. But at the end of the day, we just kind of said, you know, we're going to deal with it. We're going to work with it. So here's where we are. I was in a city council. I was in park commissions and whatnot, so I understand how this works. My thought is I could sit here and talk about what I don't like, but I also want to talk about maybe what some solutions might be. At the end of the day, for us, my family, and some of the neighbors that aren't here tonight, the way we feel is that Sundays are very sacred, just absolutely sacred for us. And part of the conditions of use and the reasons that the mayor and the city council at the time came up with the CUP plan was because of noise abatement and the fact that the whole idea was to keep the peace and tranquility of that area, right? There's a lot of open area, you know, noise travels very easily. So we looked at Sunday as that reprieve. So Sundays is just a huge concern for us. From a hours extended thing, you know, we have children in school, and when you look at the days or the weeks, let's just look at weeks during the school season. So the barn opens up May 1st, ends October 31st, call it 24 to 26 weeks, depending on how you do your math. 16 of those weeks are school weeks, okay? So you're looking at May through middle of June. June 10th is when my kids in Mahtomedi finish school. And then you look at them starting school right at the beginning of September. So you've got 2 months and 6 weeks on top of that, right? So there's a lot of weeks that are affected if a venue goes into the evening. And I understand, I mean, from my perspective, I like to offer solutions, which I will get to. But we do feel that, 10 p.m. at night is a major concern. I think we probably all have different opinions of things. At the end of the day, if the business wants to have extended hours so they can do those venues, those business things, my guess is those business things, I run a very large business. We don't do corporate events, beyond typically 8 o'clock. So I can see where businesses would want to use that during the week. From my perspective, something after 8 o'clock becomes an issue because that's when we open our windows up and get that breeze coming from the south side going into our house. And if we have to deal with that potentially Monday through Sunday, I mean, that's every day, right? So the other point I guess I want to make is if the intention of the business is not necessarily to have any more days but just have more flexibility, then a shorter hour on the weekdays would still accomplish the goal of having, corporations come in with the idea that, okay, instead of maybe 4 days, it's still 3 days, but now you just have more hour operations as a, option, right, to draw in that crowd. But from my perspective, Sundays just is an absolute no. I think the deck going on the back side will abate some noise on the north side. There is noise on the north side. I mean, I can just tell you there is. I mean, we can do decimal meters and all that. It's real. I think the noise will probably go to the south side a lot more than it is today. So, it's potentially helping us on the north side, which we're very close. My only concern is that, like when I was looking at the drawings, the deck looked even bigger than the barn itself. And if you start extending that deck beyond the east and west sides of that barn, now you might as well just say, let's sit out in front on the north side and we'll have a party. Because now the abatement issue isn't even, it's actually a negative. So I don't know how all that deck plan works out. I was in councils before. We usually have some very detailed drawings to show up on a screen, size, exacts. I hear 2 different sizes. I'd certainly would like to ask that we confirm what that size is going to be. We confirm what the ultimate hours are going to be. Because, again, so that's just, from my standpoint, is I think we've got to button up, that from a neighborhood perspective, from our standpoint. I would just go to say, on a proposal standpoint, is, from our perspective, is 3 events per week, no Sundays, and nothing beyond 8 p.m. on weekdays. And I can't stop anyone from putting a deck in, but if the deck extends beyond, then now all of a sudden it's like having the doors open. So that's just, from my perspective and where I'm standing. So I'm trying to offer something that would be somewhat of a compromise, allow the business to continue to flourish, but yet not create a situation that is more than what it is today. So thank you very much for your time.
Can I ask you one quick question before you
Sure.
sit down? You had 3 days per week, no Sundays, and what was your third point?
Well,
8 p.m.
the extension on weekdays, I realize 2 p.m. is difficult, right? But if, from our perspective, we're kind of lights out with our kids, between that 8 and 9 o'clock hour. So when things end at 8 o'clock and they finish at 9 because people are moving things out of their van and the band's leaving, 9 p.m. is really lights out for us.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you.
Thanks.
Tina. And you have to fill your name out, too.
Yes, I will. All right, Tina Lobin, 11034 Irish Avenue North. I just have a couple things I jotted down here as I've been sitting through the meeting, listening to everyone, and thinking about this over the last couple of days. So I was actually on the city council when this CUP came through. We did not have a planning commission at that time, so the city council had to do the public hearings and do the CUP accordingly. It was quite the ordeal, if I remember correctly. So, a couple of the points that I have is I am a business owner in Grant. I fully support businesses in Grant. I also support CUPs, and which I have a COC, a little bit different, but we have those rules for reasons that need to be followed. I live on a lake. It's very small, but I can tell you that in my yard, which is quite a ways away from the lake, the house is, I can hear, depending upon the weather, I can hear people on the far end of the other side of the lake. I can hear every word of their conversation. So depending on weather, like Mr. DeVore was saying, you can hear everything or nothing. If the wind is blowing at the opposite direction, if it's hot, if it's cold, it all depends on the weather. I hate to go against you, Mr. Tufte, but I don't believe trees have anything to do with sound. They do block scenery, they do block some lighting, if they're a thick, like an arborvitae style tree or very dense pine trees. I don't think that trees actually buffer any sound per se. I also believe, which I don't know that it's a fact, I could see this happening, is that the Seven Vines winery is probably causing you guys quite the competition. That is what I am seeing the reason for this coming forward. I understand that, but this is a rural residential area. They're not set on 50 or 100 acres in the middle of nowhere. You have homes across from them, behind them, basically all around them. And I just, even when I was on the council and we went through the CUP, I did vote no, caught some slack for that, because I did not want it open on Sundays. That, typically on weekends, people like to be home, especially on Sunday. You want to be home, you want to be out barbecuing, if you have kids, you want to be out playing in the yard with your kid, relaxing, doing what people do on Sunday. Having the hours of operation extended to a Sunday, in my book then, was an absolute no, and my opinion still stands the same. So, what else was I going to say here? Basically that You know, like I said, I'm all for business under certain CUP conditions. As far as during the week goes, I'm sorry, I don't see the need to have something like that going on during the week in a residential area. It doesn't matter to me if it's work night or school night. During the week, people in a residential area, rural residential area, a little bit different if you live right in town, one on top of the other, should be entitled to quiet and enjoy their property. And unless, you know, you're going to listen to noise because it produces manure, I mean, if you have horses, cattle, hogs, whatever it is, you have chickens, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't silence them. But as far as music, large groups of people gathering weekend after weekend after weekend, day after day after day during the week, if I was still on the council and this came forward, I would be a big no. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Is there anybody else that'd like to speak?
There's two, one of them.
Come on. Kind of hard to see you through this.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Blomberg Wicks. I live at 12015 Heather Avenue North, and my home is directly on the northeast corner from the wedding barn. So for me and my family, the noise issue is more with the outdoor ceremonies, which are amplified. That hasn't been brought up yet tonight. So the wedding ceremonies are outside on beautiful hill unless it's inclement weather. It's amplified. Inside my house, I can hear the officiant, I can hear the vows, I can hear all the music, not just in my front yard or on my screen porch. In my house, I can hear verbatim. During the receptions, even with the doors closed, as some of my fellow neighbors have voiced their concerns about the noise as well, when I can really hear the thumping of the bass of the DJ, or I can hear the DJ calling out the dollar dance, then I do put a call in to the Washington County Sheriff. This past season, I believe Ms. Jordan said they had 40 events. I called the sheriff, myself or my spouse, 4 times with noise complaints on Friday or Saturday nights. Per the original meetings back in 2014, I was a concerned neighbor at that time as well. And as far as the Sundays, it was supposed to be nothing happening on the property, and I can say they've been non-compliant. They're still coming and going. They're still doing showings. There's still maintenance happening, so it's not peaceful, quiet for us neighbors on this Sundays without an event happening right now or this last couple seasons. So I agree with Mr. Windich. I have 5 kids in school, and that 10 p.m. Monday through Thursday is, even Sunday night, not acceptable to me at all. So just wanted to speak my piece there. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Kevin Rhodes. I live at 12160 Upper Heather Avenue North. So it's the property that directly to the north of the wedding barn up on the ridge there. So I won't read, I've got a number of points I wanted to make. Most of them have been made by my neighbors, and I agree with those points. Let me just say, it can be loud. I mean, it can preclude any Friday or Saturday activity from May 1st to October 31st. That's it. I mean, that's summertime in Minnesota. We can't do things. We can't schedule parties. We can't have friends over with any guarantee any summer weekend evening. That's it. They've already got that. Okay, and now they want more, right? So where's the balance here? So we heard a lot about, concern for the neighbors, having quiet weeks, respite for the neighbors. None of that's in this proposal. I mean, there's no balance at all. I mean, it's an outdoor deck. Now, is the noise going to go north? Is the noise going to go south? I don't know. All I know is it's going to increase the number and the duration and the level of outdoor activities on that property. And I was here in 2014, and that was the big concern. I mean, if the barn doors are shut, if they're following the CUP, it makes a lot of difference between that and being outside. The deck is going to increase the amount of outdoor activities. You know, on top of the Friday and the Saturday, again, you know, I'll confirm, you know, I think what Ms. Loban said was right. It was an ordeal in 2014. Sunday was really a big issue. So the fact they want to come back for Sundays and make it, you know it's going to be the Sunday of Memorial Day. That's out. There goes Memorial Day weekend for us. It's going to be the Sunday of Labor Day. You know it. There goes Labor Day weekend. So the bookend long weekends on either end of the summer are out for us. We can't do anything on those. And who knows, you know, it's unpredictable where those other Sundays are going to be. So, you know, as Ms. Loban said, you know, there was no planning commission to do your job in 2014. The city council held a public hearing in May of 2014, and then they revisited, or in April, I believe, and then they revisited in May. And all these issues, I mean, there was a lot of discussion. I mean, look at the minutes of those meetings. So then their Mayor Carr and then Council Member Huber, you know, they talked about balance. And they worked really hard. And these days and hours of operation and the restrictions and all those 38 points on the CUP, that was the balance. And nothing's changed. I mean, we still live just as close. You know, there's still kids in the neighborhood. You know, nothing's changed. And then, you know, they want to upset the balance, and all the rest is just talk about what they would do to just try to mitigate this. None of that's in the proposal at all. Okay? So, you know, I would encourage you, go back and look at the careful consideration that was given and how we balance, you know, in an A1 zone, you know, agricultural with a residential neighborhood right across the street, because that balance was reached, and I don't know why we're revisiting it, because really nothing has changed. And let me conclude another point that hasn't been made. I really find it odd that we're talking about these open houses on Sunday, which are an obvious violation of the CUP, and you know, we're talking about, you know, rewarding a failure to comply by maybe changing it to permit that. If that's what Ms. Haskamp was suggesting, I'm strongly opposed to that. I don't think you get rewarded for failure to comply, right? And I also think it's out of order. I mean, I wish Mr. Snyder were here to talk about this, but you know, that isn't part of the request. And you got lectured when you started talking about trees, because that wasn't part of the request, so staff stopped that. But open houses are not part of the request. It hasn't been noticed. There's no public notice of open houses, so I don't even think it's on the agenda for tonight, and I certainly don't think that failure to abide by the rules, have events every Sunday in January, ought to be rewarded by an expansion of the CUP. So thank you.
Can you sign in, please?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
I'd like to add that those same Sunday open houses were also held in October. So on their website, on their Facebook, I have a copy of the same things, the all Sundays.
Thank you. No one else is wanting to get up and talk?
Okay, I move we close the hearing.
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, here comes someone.
Carl Swanson.
Okay.
I live at 7665 120th Street North. Hugo's a mailing address, but I actually live in Grant. I don't get a post office in Grant. I'm right to the east of Jordan's farm, Wedding Barn, and it's approximately, well, I'd say my property is 300 feet from theirs.
Okay.
So there's one in between, right?
Right to the east of their property. There's one in between me and those folks. Now, we've been there for over 30 years and do not have any other problems with noise out there. We spend a lot of time outside too. And it doesn't really bother us. Maybe I can't hear too much. I want to apologize for my phone making all the noise down here too, because I do realize you folks are sensitive to noise, so, but I just couldn't get it shut off in time. But anyway, I can see people could be concerned about noise too, but in this area too, we have a lot of mosquitoes and things in the evening, and I find it pretty hard to believe that people can be out on their decks all night long in the summertime to enjoy the area and the atmosphere and not have a problem with mosquitoes out there too. They do spray, they do put stuff out, but it still gets kind of bad out there too. And the cars come along that curve and the motorcycles, That creates more noise than anything that I've ever heard from the wedding barn. And if you've ever taken any sound levels of that during the summertime, you'd probably be surprised at how loud that can be. I know the train's got to stop the whistle at 10 o'clock now too, but that's another thing too. But no, I don't have any problems with the Jordans and the wedding barn, and I just wanted to at least be one person that says that, you know, we don't have a problem in the area. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Should I try that again?
Seeing none, yeah.
Okay, make a move to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
Okay, let's do the vote then. We'll say, all those in favor of shutting down the public hearing, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Unanimous. So, anyone have any more questions of Jennifer?
Not directly, but I'd be happy to kick off the discussion.
Okay, I was going to say, anybody have any questions for her? But
Jennifer, would you mind bringing up the 4 or 5 points that you felt that we needed to discuss individually or as a group before we start?
that could be our guideline. Huh?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, could I provide just a little bit of clarification with respect to the open houses that were brought up as to whether or not that was requested or not? Staff brought that up because that was a violation that was noted in our review today. So while I apologize for the delay in the communication, it was something staff discovered today, which was clearly in violation of what is stated within the permit. Staff would be irresponsible in not bringing that to your attention when we are in fact talking about whether or not they have complied with their permit. When they talk about whether or not there are multiple complaints that have been made or not, all we have is what neighbors write or document. If you haven't written it and we haven't received it, we have no idea that there is a problem. So I apologize for your circumstances from the standpoint of this feels like the testimony that we've heard is that there are repeated violations, that there are concerns of ongoing operations, but that's not something we've been made aware of. And so now we've heard it tonight during the testimony, but that hasn't been documented and that hasn't been communicated to staff. So staff did our very best to document what we've heard since the permit was issued in 2014, which is the portion of your staff report, which I believe is on page 2 or 3, to highlight what we've heard. If it hasn't been documented, staff does not have a crystal ball, and we cannot know. And I know that we received something in 2018. The 2018 statement says multiple times this has happened, but if you haven't contacted us, we don't know. And so I just want to make sure that that's clear. Staff in no way has tried to ignore the neighbors or not be responsive to the neighbors. If we haven't heard of the complaint, we don't know it exists. Staff brought up the issue of the open houses because we just saw it today on the website when we were doing our due diligence to see if their marketing materials matched the conditions of the permit. So I want to make that perfectly clear.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I'd like to make a clarification also on the complaint process within the City of Grant. There is a form that is filled out and does need to be submitted. It states right on the form that it is the complainant's responsibility to follow up on what happened with the complaint. And another clarification with the Sheriff's Department and calling deputies. The clarification is that the deputies are calling the police do not enforce certain conditions in a CUP. They do enforce any violations of city ordinance, such as the noise. If it's going past a certain time, absolutely you should be calling the police. They can give tickets for that. They do enforce ordinances. They do not enforce certain conditions in a CUP if it's not an ordinance violation.
Okay.
Good.
May I make one comment? I would like to address about the open houses, because we didn't know that we were in violation. In all greatness, that's when it's not, I don't know how you define, it's not an open house, we're welcoming them to come, a bride to stop by, or potential client, to take a look around. So, and that's how we show the farm, so in the winter months and summer, so they can book our wedding. That's how we do a tour. So they call up, so it tells them that they can either stop by or they can call for a private tour. So we didn't think that was an event, so by no means would we want to try and do anything that would, be against our permit. So would be ignorance on our part. So like I said, we're an open book. We're trying to follow the rules like everybody else in the community, trying to make it a great place for our event and do what's right. If it's something wrong, we would never, we wouldn't have published it so public, because it'd be showing that we're doing something wrong. So that's what we're doing essentially on this. It's the opportunity for someone to stop by to give you an example, this past Sunday I had nobody. Saturday we had three different individuals that stopped. We give them a 20-minute, they walk around, we take them inside the house, it's so cold out, there's no heat in the barn, and we answer their questions and they leave, and sometimes they will book for this coming summer, or they just leave with our information. So that's what we are doing. So if we're not supposed to be doing it, we ask that we can, or for feedback, but that's what we're doing. We're not holding a party. It's not like an open house party that you're thinking. If we pardon?
Sounds like you could handle the same thing by individual appointments and not have an open house.
Correct. If I went to put that word on, they've been calling for the last 5 years. If you didn't see that on our website, they would call us after they've gotten an inquiry from us, and it says, please call for a private tour. And then they come on an individual basis. The client would come, and then we give them a tour of the farm inside and out, and then we give them paper and either, sign that day for a date that would like, or they'll call back at a future date, and then they come back. So, but if we do an open house, we didn't do one last year, but we have done an open house that we would say would be considered an event. And then we would have like a caterer serving food, and it would be during a certain amount of time, and we'd have like vendors there. And that is done on one of our event days. And it's usually done the first weekend in May or the second, so that would be done it's usually a Saturday. We wouldn't do an open house with vendors and then invite people to come see, different people there, but that is held, when we have done it, it's on one of our Friday or Saturdays. So that would be counted as one of our event days. And that's it, unless you have any other questions.
I have a comment about that, which is that the open houses have been going on since the first season, and in the letter of complaint that I wrote to the city at that point, I included copies of those open house notifications. And since they continued on, I figured that it was something that wasn't going to be followed up on.
Mr. Chair, if you're going to continue to entertain, we need her to come up because we need to be able to get it recorded.
It's okay, public comments are over, so let's stop that.
She's talking.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the person that's making an application. So we want to talk with her more and get more information out of her.
But if we're in violation, we definitely will not do that. But that was for us to be able to show the farm. And that's when people off work want to come, so that's when they're coming. They're coming on a weeknight or on Sunday, so we didn't think that was in violation, because it's not an event we thought in our mind.
Well, I'm not sure how an open house to try to sell business is an event.
It's just there's not vendors or anything there. It just gives them an hour, that says from 10 to 4, and then someone would pull up and knock on our door, and then we'd walk outside, and then we'd take them around. Versus saying you have an appointment time, versus saying you're to come at 1 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if that is against our violations, we will not do that.
Well, I think the difference, Bob, is that an open house and have an unknown number of people all showing up at the same time. It can be a mob. Whereas if you have an appointment, you're only
Wish it was.
meeting.
That'd be good for us, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yes, it's
possibility.
suggesting that you're right, it could happen. So we won't do that. We will do private tours because we do want to respect our neighbors, but that would be good if it was a mob. That'd be more clients.
Tours, okay. Anybody else have questions of our applicant?
I don't.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to know a lot more about the deck. We have two different sizes.
I can tell you the barn is 60 feet long, so it's the concern the neighbors or people were possibly thinking it was going to go further. That would never be the, that was never the thought process, and then that was our error on our part, that you had a 35 and 40. If you do come to the back of our barn, you will see that from the point of the barn, from the, actually go north-south, is that east and west, when you come down the long driveway, from the west side of the corner of the barn to the, we have a horse pasture on the top of the east of the barn, and there's actually a fence that probably comes 20 feet. So that part of the barn right there is taken care of, so we'd never go into the horse pasture. So the deck would never be any more than, because that back of the barn, there's not that much room left. It's either gonna be 35 or 40, so from a weight standpoint, we're totally open, you know, because maybe you need 40 feet, you know, 40 feet, because you're having a certain amount of people out there.
So if it was centered, we're talking about 10 feet from the end of each end of the deck to the
So
end of the
35
barn.
would probably, sounds like 35 would be a bet, would be it when you look at it that respectfully, because you have.
12.5 feet instead.
Okay, I know that area, the pitch of the ground goes downhill. How far will the deck be?
It's all flat.
It's all flat there?
Yes, it's 2 stories on the back of the barn, and then it's all flat.
It
And then
is,
it drops down,
okay.
yeah.
I thought there was a downhill run there.
Not for a while. And then it goes down to the,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's 16 feet at least. It's gonna be
At
flat.
least, there's gotta be, yeah, there's a lot, there's gotta be at least 50, 60, yeah. Good feet way out.
Okay. Is there gonna be seating out there? on the deck?
Yes, yes, there would be seating, some tables and chairs.
Table and chairs, gonna be any benches around the perimeter or built into the deck railing?
Good question. We're totally open, so yeah, you're talking about seating going around it. I think it's gonna come down to also from the weight of the deck too, because if you're putting bench around, that's going to bring more people out there. And from a weight standpoint, you can't keep going out there and counting people, so whatever the weight capacity is from being approved from the architectural drawing, that's gonna drive actually how many tables you can have and the people standing out there.
Well, I would hope that that deck would be strong enough where you take your 250 people
50
and all
people.
put them out there for somebody to take their photo from a drone where they're all crowded together.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Because you see a lot of instances where somebody
They're all
has a
out there.
party and they have a deck.
Correct.
They get a crowd that
Right,
all gets in the same place at the same time, so.
correct. We all together.
Even see where they tip over ships for the same reason, because everybody goes to the same railing. So I hope it's not just sized on how many tables
Right.
you have and things, because I don't think that's safe enough.
Correct. What have you for the safety, yeah. We're totally open if it's going to propose, like you said, concern of too many people out there, or, you know, not doing the bench, because then less people are apt to want to stay out there, even though it's going to hold 250, you said, because if all participants are out there, would it?
Crowded together.
They're all together, so then maybe we don't do benches from you talking, because that's just asking more people to sit out there, so if there's only so many seats, then it's going to detain people to go in.
Are you going to be providing an architectural drawing?
We can do that, yes. We wanted to get some feedback. We were hoping to get feedback. And then if that's what the next step you need, then we could go to that
Okay.
and get all the drawings and get everything done.
And since you're making these changes and there's gonna be people on the other side now and that kind of thing, are you doing any hiring of an expert in the field of sound to guide you a little bit in what you may or may not be able to do to soften the blow to
The neighbors?
residents?
We could look at rehiring that same gentleman that did the Excel Energy Center. He came with very high regards and knew the sound industry, had been in it for years. So we could reach out to him and ask him what the sound would, you know. We did, when he did come, he actually, like I said, went around to they went to all the different areas of all the neighborhoods around us when they did the study. It's a full, very extensive report. If that's something else that you foresee, with that many people out there, they're out there now, but they're not in that one confined area. So does that make a difference, like what you're thinking? Because they're out there now all for cocktail hour. All 200 people are out there now.
Yeah, and also that when they went out the north and they were standing by your beautiful area there, I think I'd want to stand there too, but, so then you have to have someone hired to scoot them down to the.
It's about 20 people will gather. There'll usually be 20 people right after dinner standing there, but they said they can hear that even if there's 2. So, but it's not like 200 by no means, because there just can't be from our permit that we are asked to do that. That was one of the things that came up this past July. There was a bunch of extra people there, so we really try and push them.
Well, again, trees are not the best sound stopper. That's a fact. I've read up on sound things a little bit, and that's the worst one. It doesn't, there's a least amount of good, but still does something. So if you were to put trees in certain areas, they would still help out with a little bit of sound suppression. But the main thing is light. Like cars' headlights hitting people's windows at, 11 o'clock at night or whatever, 10 o'clock. Can you take that into consideration a little bit? And because you're expanding, you're not going to have necessarily more cars, but we're getting certain complaints about lights now. And if you could do something about that with this, it would sure help.
Yeah, that's something that I have to bring my husband into. Now you're getting over my head from all that, because we did so much for the permit that all the different, engineers and that did all that research and the hours that they spent on all that. And I thought that they had went over what was, would be of substantial return for the neighbors and, would it help? And then we put the dimming lights in the parking lot. I know that was a huge issue from the lights pointing at different people. So understand your concerns. I'm not sure to what standpoint, they did all that before, if it's going to help or not help.
Well, I'm speaking specifically of one person to your west, that every car that leaves, the headlights hit his house.
Correct.
And if there were a treeway of assisting
right in that general area.
So
proposing that, right.
And it's an issue that probably could have been faced on the first time around, but we're still dealing with increasing frequency of events or
correct
hours extension, all kinds of things. And I don't see anything wrong with maybe trying to
look at something like
help
that.
neighbors a little bit.
Right. Something that could be looked at. Like I said, I don't know, like how many feet is it? And, when their lights turn, is it, how do you, so, because you got to figure out, like I said, how many trees and which lights turn and where, and to make that difference, and so.
Well, we'll have to try to get that into words for.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know how to answer. I understand what you're asking for, but.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very
We're
much.
gonna start chatting here a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
Amongst ourselves, I guess. Where do you want to start? You want to do the?
Jerry was hoping to start.
Jerry, was,
I can, but if any one of you want to take a shot at it first, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I'd just like to state, I'm not comfortable approving it as written, as that the applicant is asking for. I think that's too much.
Are you talking about hours?
Hours.
Okay.
Okay. And I think the concerns of the neighbors are legitimate. I think the neighbors deserve a break, at least a day a week at a minimum. And I agree.
No Sunday?
I think the Sundays out would be a good idea. And I also think put a total limit of events per year. It's approximately 26 weeks of a season, and currently they could have 3 events a week. And if they did 3 events a week, that would be 78 a year. Now, granted, that's probably very unlikely to happen. But if you jump it up to 4 events a week, that's 100 events a year. Again, that's probably unlikely to happen. But the potential is there. Let's say if the business was sold or something like that, someone could take it and and really run with it. So I think to try to put a number of total events for the year would be a good idea.
You have a number in mind?
Well, the applicant stated somewhere around 40 is what they would do. I would say somewhere between 40 and 50 I just would go with.
Okay, the potential now is 78, 50. Could you live with 50 events?
I would leave it as is, thanks, there's no, I mean,
That's 78.
yeah, you're capping our business right now. Have we ever done 70? No. Like, we haven't done the first weekend in May for 3 years. So I understand your concern, so I could see a cap, but I feel like you're taking me backwards. You're kind of taking it away, you know. So I don't feel comfortable with that, but I do understand your concern.
And our concern isn't necessarily with you, but the reality of a CUP is that it goes with the land. You don't know who the next owners are going to be or how they're going to behave, and if we don't have something written down, we don't have it. So would you at least think about it, and we'll talk a little later about what you could possibly live with, because we're going to have to wheel a deal here somewhere. We want to take care of the neighbors, but we don't want to kill your business.
Correct.
But we'd like to find some way to work toward a goal of reaching a little bit. If you're mad at us and they're mad at us, we probably did something right. But taking either side, that's not going to help. So,
What's everybody else's opinion on the number of events per year?
Well, Jeff, I personally feel that the city council did a pretty good job of the majority of the CUP conditions in 2014. I don't think revisiting that is appropriate at this time, and honestly, I think that they did a pretty good job of trying to find a balance. I don't feel compelled to approve the extension of any hours or compromise at all. I think they did a pretty good, compromise in 14. Out of respect for the entire neighborhood and everybody else around. I don't feel compelled to make any changes at this time.
the city council is going to get this again too, so if they want to revisit it, they can.
Exactly.
But
I think a lot of time was spent in 2014 by city council coming up with those conditions, and I think it was a good compromise at the time, and I don't feel compelled to add Sundays or even extending the weekday hours.
Okay.
My comments would be along the same vein. I'll just elaborate a little bit. First of all, I think that the owners have done a good job in physically complying with the CUP, having the buildings and the yard what it's supposed to be. But the difficult part really gets into enforcement. Every weekend or every event, you have a different crowd of people coming in. They're not your neighbors. They're somebody who's paid good money to come to your place and have a good time, and when they're there, hey, we're here once, and if the owner is squawking about the noise we're making, well, we can quiet down until they're away, and we'll go back to what we're doing, because we don't really have any liability to anybody. So I think, even with the best intentions, I think enforcement disappears. Somebody visited your place, and when they were sort of recognized as maybe somebody who counted on in the city government here someplace, well, then the sound went down, the doors went closed. When you're out in the, people go out in the country to such a beautiful place as that, they really don't want to stay inside with those doors closed on a beautiful night. You plan to have the deck closed off, but I really doubt how effective that could be. People are really going to love a deck compared to being out on a gravel road. Then if you don't let them go out on the deck, well, now they're going out the front door. And if it's nice outside, you're not going to just go out the front door and climb in their cars and drive away. If you shoo them away from the front door, they're going to go to the parking lot and they're going to talk down there. So I think I don't think the city is very well equipped to enforce things either. Okay, we have an inspector who's very good at going out and looking at physical properties and seeing that everything's proper. But you're not going to, he takes care of, 4 or 5 different cities as inspector. You're not going to be able to call him at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and he's not going to go out there, I don't think.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, the city does not have somebody on staff that's called at 9 o'clock at night to go check out CUP conditions. But the building inspector does zoning enforcement. So he's not just looking at structures, he investigates all complaints. He does look at CUP conditions. But no, there's nobody to call at 9 o'clock at night. No.
So it's after the fact.
It's a
he
complaint
said,
that's
she
put
said
in.
sort of situation. And I'm not knocking it, but it's the reality in Grant.
Yep.
That's how things are gonna be. Second thing is, or I guess maybe it's the third thing, but having no violations is not equal to happiness. You know, you talk about decibel levels, but think about if you're, I know at least on my house, I'm lying in bed and I hear water dripping, faucets leaking. That can keep me awake or bother me. I can have cars going by on Highway 36, which is only a quarter mile away. And on a general night, I can, if I'm awake, I'll hear the vehicles, but the sound ramps up and then it gets loud and it fades away. Compare that to when somebody hits the cymbals or pounds on the drums or rattles the walls with bass. That's a lot more of a disturbance. If you have young kids or a sick kid and you're trying to get some sleep and trying to get your kids to bed at night, and this is going on even before 11 o'clock, I think it's a major disruption. I think the balance was established with great diligence in 2014. I went back and watched the replays of both city council meetings, and I think each meeting was like 4 or 5 hours long. I'll admit that wasn't always the only agenda item, but lengthy discussion went on, and it was pretty much laid out that if you got this facility and you were allowed to operate under these rules, this would be it. Everybody'd be happy, and well, I wouldn't say everybody's gonna be happy because I see people out here who were at that meeting and know they said they wouldn't be happy because there'd been a couple samples already and the indications were not good. But the so-called, I would say, very shaky balance was established, and I have to agree with my associate over here that I don't care to change that balance. So I guess I'll just declare right now, any changes we make to this, any amendment I am opposed to, I will be opposed to. I'm going to be voting no on any change whatsoever. Unless you want to change to go backwards to less, but I don't think you're here for that.
Does that include the deck?
So that includes the deck, because it's deck I see as being a maybe or a possible transfer of a front door problem to a back door problem. I don't know, maybe people will walk around the building in the dark and go on the deck. They say, well, they don't want us on the front here. If we got the doors closed, let's go on the deck. And they walk around the barn and go on the deck. People like decks. And we're out on the deck, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be quiet. And then that terrain behind the barn or to the south going to all those neighbors, there's just no barriers. It's a low thing. There's no hills. And trees, I agree with some people that say that trees don't really block sound. I agree with it because they sure don't block the sound where I live. There's a lot of trees between me and Highway 36. And then in terms of sound level varies so much with the weather. Sometimes I can hardly hear Highway 36. Other times I'm thinking, boy, I think Highway 36 runs through my neighbor's yard. And I'm sure that your neighbors experience the same sort of thing. So I guess I pretty well spouted out what I think about this whole thing. And the CUP goes with the property. You might be the finest owners that the place ever has, but all the conditions that could be granted to you get sold to the next person, and they might not work at it as hard as you do. So.
I'm basically of the same mind. It's not that I want to make trouble for the people that now have it, but even a new deck is expanding your noise level. And I doubt very much that that barn will protect much to the north, even though it's on the south. Now, I grew up on a farm. There's nothing more irritating than a cow bellowing at 12 midnight. And that's only a couple of cows, but about 150 people. And they get pretty loud once they've had several of them. So I'm not in favor of extending this at all, period.
Any other comments? If not, I'll make a motion that we recommend to the city council that they deny approval of the amended CUP.
A second.
Okay, here we go. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that want to say no, say no. Or
No.
Yes, or, I'm going to vote in favor of it. I want to make some changes, but I'd like to see that we do something that makes sense, that we take the comments of people who have been disturbed into consideration and come up with something that can help both sides. So I'm going to vote yes in favor of the change, some of the changes, but with,
Which is a no to the voting no on the motion.
yep.
Okay, so it's declared. I guess I would just make one more comment that doesn't count, is that we did have several letters too that were not discussed. Other people who did not come to this meeting who voiced their opposition to it, so the size of the crowd that we're looking at here tonight is not a true indication of the opposition to.
Well,
this
Mr.
amended
Chair
CUP.
and Commissioners, now that you've made that clarification, not all of those letters were against, so let's just be real clear.
I don't know that the deputy sheriff here is the one that you're saying is a positive. Was there another one? No, I didn't think so.
Not that submitted letters, no.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to state that I think there could be room for a compromise. But the vote's been taken. So that's why I voted against the.
Well, okay, old business, is there any old business before us?
Mr. Chair, before the folks in the audience take off, if we could just announce that this will likely be passed on to the city council at their next meeting, which is the first Tuesday of the month. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that.
There a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Somebody made the motion, you got a second?
Yes, I made the motion.
Oh, okay. And I heard a second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 No one's gonna object to that.
You don't have to worry about my new guy.